The night my father threw me out onto the freezing pavement, I was only 11 years old. I stood there clutching a single garbage bag of my belongings, watching the taillights of his truck vanish into the heavy rain. For 20 years, that moment defined my life. It was the burning question that kept me awake at night, the gaping wound that never truly healed. Why did a father who used to tuck me in at night suddenly decide I was garbage? I spent 2 decades believing I was unlovable, running from the shadow of his rejection. But yesterday, a dusty wooden box arrived at my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a diary, a set of old bank statements, and a truth so shattering it changed everything I thought I knew about my past. If you think you know where the story goes, prepare yourself. Follow my story until the end. My name is Chloe, and today I am 31 years old. If you looked at my life right now, my quiet apartment, my steady career, the calm way I carry myself, you would never guess the chaotic, broken foundation it was built upon. But if you strip away the layers of time, you will find an 11-year-old girl standing on a rain-slicked driveway, shivering in a thin jacket. That night is frozen in my memory like a scene from a horror movie. One minute, I was in my bedroom, trying to read a book by the dim light of my desk lamp. The next, my father slammed the door open. His face wasn't filled with the warmth I had known as a little girl. It was a mask of cold, unyielding rage. He didn't say a word as he grabbed a black plastic garbage bag and began tearing through my room, throwing my clothes, my favorite stuffed bear, and a few school notebooks inside. I remember screaming, begging him to tell me what I had done wrong. Had I forgotten to clear the dinner table? Were my grades not good enough? He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just gripped my arm, led me down the stairs, and pushed me out the front door. "You don't belong here anymore, Chloe," he barked, his voice sounding hollow and detached. "Get in the truck." He drove me across town in absolute silence, the windshield wipers slicing through the heavy downpour. He pulled up to the curb outside my Aunt Sarah's small apartment, reached over, and shoved the heavy garbage bag into my lap. "Out," he commanded. I stepped onto the freezing pavement, and before I could even turn around, the taillights of his truck vanished into the darkness. Aunt Sarah found me sobbing on her porch. She was a kind woman, struggling to make ends meet on a waitress's salary, but she opened her door and took me in without hesitation. That was the night my childhood ended, leaving me with a question that would haunt me for the next 20 years. Growing up in the shadow of that rainy night changed the very fabric of who I was. For the next 2 decades, I lived with an invisible, heavy weight crushing my chest. Aunt Sarah did everything she could to give me a normal life, but how do you fix a child who believes her own flesh and blood found her disposable? I poured all of my pain, anger, and confusion into my schoolwork. While other teenagers were going to parties and making friends, I was buried in books, determined to prove my worth to a world that had rejected me. I graduated at the top of my class, landed a scholarship, and eventually built a successful career as a financial analyst. On paper, I was thriving. I had the perfect apartment, a great salary, and total independence. But beneath the polished exterior, I was completely hollow. The true damage of my father's abandonment wasn't visible on the outside. It was rooted deep within my heart. I was terrified of letting anyone get close to me. Every time a friend tried to get to know the real me, or a guy asked me out on a second date, a panic button would go off in my mind. The logic was always the same. If the man who brought you into this world could throw you away like garbage, why wouldn't a stranger do the same? I became a master at pushing people away before they could hurt me. I chose loneliness over the risk of being abandoned again, building high, thick walls around my emotions. 20 years passed in this self-imposed isolation, with me running on a hamster wheel of work and solitude, trying desperately to outrun the ghost of the 11-year-old girl still crying on the porch. Then, yesterday, the fragile wall of safety I had spent 20 years building completely collapsed. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the rain outside was hitting my apartment window with a rhythm that felt entirely too familiar. A sharp knock at the door broke the silence. When I opened it, there was no one there, just a heavy, rectangular package sitting on the welcome mat. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address or courier markings, just my name and address written in a bold, sweeping script that made my stomach drop instantly. I hadn't seen that handwriting since I was 11 years old. It belonged to my father. With trembling hands, I brought the package inside and tore away the paper. Beneath it was a dusty, old wooden box secured with a heavy brass latch. Tucked under the latch was a formal letter from a legal firm based in Chicago. The text was brief and clinical, stating that my father had passed away exactly 1 month ago from a sudden illness. According to his strict, legally binding instructions, this box was to be held by their firm for 2 decades and delivered directly to me only after the 20-year mark had passed from the date I left his house. I sat down heavily on my living room floor, staring at the box as a wave of conflicting emotions threatened to drown me. Anger, grief, and a sudden, paralyzing fear fought for control. For 20 years, I had craved answers, but now that they were sitting right in front of me, I was terrified of what I might find inside. Finally, my need for closure overcame my fear. I reached out, clicked the brass latch open, and lifted the heavy wooden lid. Inside lay a faded leather diary, a stack of old bank statements, and a truth that was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about my past. I carefully lifted the faded leather diary from the box, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Taking a deep breath, I turned to the entries from the months right before that horrific night. As I read my father's words, the cold, unyielding monster I had hated for 20 years vanished, replaced by a desperate man caught in a waking nightmare. The diary revealed that my mother's final cancer treatments had left us completely bankrupt. Desperate to keep her alive, my father had taken out loans from a ruthless, corrupt local syndicate hiding behind a legitimate trucking business. When my mother passed away, the debt didn't disappear. It multiplied. The entries became increasingly frantic. He wrote about men showing up at his workplace, threatening to burn our house down with us inside if he didn't help them move illegal cargo across state lines. He had refused, trying to find a legal way out, until the day everything changed. I found a printed email tucked between the pages, dated just 48 hours before he threw me out. It was a surveillance photograph of me sitting at my school desk, taken through the classroom window. Attached was a chilling message from the syndicate leader. Coordinate the next shipment, or your daughter becomes collateral. My father was trapped. He knew that reporting them to the local police, who were rumored to be on the syndicate's payroll, would only fast-track a tragedy. The diary entries from those final hours were smudged with dried tears. He wrote about looking at me while I slept, realizing that as long as I was in his house, under his name, I was a target. They were going to use my life to break him, and he knew he couldn't protect me on his own. He needed a plan to completely sever me from his dangerous world, a way to make the syndicate believe that I was no longer his weakness or his leverage. I stared at the page, my own tears blurring the ink as the terrifying truth finally sank in. My eviction wasn't an act of hatred. It was a desperate, calculated shield. The diary entries from the night of my eviction cut straight to my heart. My father wrote about the agonizing choice he had to make, a decision that tore his soul apart. He realized that if he sent me away lovingly, the syndicate would know I was still his weakness. They would track me down to Aunt Sarah's apartment and use me against him anyway. The only way to guarantee my safety was to make a clean, hostile break. He had to fake a total, cold-hearted rejection, so convincing that anyone watching would believe he truly didn't care about me anymore. If the syndicate believed I was worthless to him, they would have absolutely no reason to hunt me down or use me as leverage. He wrote about the unbearable pain of packing my clothes into that black garbage bag while I screamed and begged for answers. Every cry of mine was a dagger to his heart, but he had to maintain his mask of unyielding rage. He explicitly stated in his diary that he forced himself to look cruel so that I would hate him, because hatred would keep me from ever trying to come back to his house, where the danger was waiting. He drove me to Aunt Sarah's in silence because he knew if he spoke, his voice would crack and betray his immense grief. When he watched me walk to that porch in the pouring rain, he knew he was sacrificing his relationship with his only daughter to save her life. For 20 years, I carried the pain of being discarded, entirely blind to the fact that his apparent cruelty was actually the ultimate, heartbreaking sacrifice of a loving father. At the very bottom of the heavy wooden box, beneath the diary and the old documents, lay a sleek leather binder containing a savings passbook and an official letter from a federal banking institution. I opened it to find a financial summary that made my breath catch. Over the last 20 years, an account under my name had been quietly growing, accumulating a staggering balance of over $400,000. The handwritten note attached to the passbook explained everything. My father hadn't just thrown me to safety and given up. He had gone to war for my future. The documents revealed that the very next morning after abandoning me on Aunt Sarah's porch, he bypassed the local authorities and went straight to the Federal Law Enforcement Division. For nearly a decade, he secretly worked as an undercover informant, risking his life every single day to systematically dismantle the criminal syndicate from the inside out. He funneled every single spare penny he earned from his trucking job, along with the secret compensation provided by the Federal Witness Program, into this protected trust fund. He lived like a ghost, spending absolutely nothing on himself, enduring poverty and isolation just to ensure that his daughter would be taken care of long after he was gone. The final bank entry was dated just weeks before his passing, a final deposit accompanied by a brief scribble. For Chloe's freedom. Build the life I couldn't give you. Looking at the numbers on the page, the financial security was overwhelming, but it paled in comparison to the immense emotional relief washing over me. He had spent his entire adult life in the trenches of danger, carrying the heavy burden of my hatred, all to build a fortress of security for me. The inheritance in my hands wasn't just money. It was 20 years of silent, fierce, and unwavering parental devotion. This morning, I stood before my father's quiet, sunlit grave for the very first time. The bitter winter chill that had frozen my heart for 20 long years was completely gone, replaced by a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude and peace. I gently placed a single white rose on the headstone, finally understanding the profound depth of his silent love. He had endured my hatred and risked his life just to keep me safe. Now, carrying his legacy and his final gift, I am ready to tear down my walls, learn to trust again, and build the beautiful life he sacrificed everything to give me. What would you do if you discovered a truth like this? Could you forgive 20 years of painful silence? Comment your thoughts below, and let me know what city you are watching from. Thank you for listening to my story until the very end.